and welcome to the Quarantine Room podcast. I will be your host, Vince Alsone, and I'll be joined by my co-hosts.
Amaris McGlynn.
Sylvester.
Eric Castellanos.
And Mahzabin Yasmin.
The focus of today's podcast is the evolution of dictatorship, and will be presented by Mahzabin Yasmin.
Okay, so today's topic is about evolution of dictatorship, and when we hear dictatorship, we think about one ruler who is dominating the whole country and nation. And whenever we think of dictatorship, we go back to Germany with Hitler, then Joseph Stalin with the Soviet Union, then Mussolini with Italy, and so on and so forth. So what dictatorship is basically just one leader having their own self-government that's just controlling to their people without listening. And there can be, in the past, we learned about how they're deadly leaders that have influenced so many countries and wars and that happen and revolutions that have led to them. So throughout history and how we are taught in our educational system, we don't really go in depth with why people never rebelled against them that had led to these outcomes, with why no one talks about it now, even though a lot of continents like Asia, Africa, South America that are still controlled by dictators in a way. And the leader that comes to become the leader of that nation. So the thing is, why isn't people talking about it? Why isn't anyone so informed and concerned about the fact that there are dictators, these leaders who are so controlling, who would kill people in order to have their self-power and self-controlling, that no one goes against them, right? I think, in my opinion, I think that this is because of the punishment that the people of the nation would get. People usually want to be safe. They want to be heard, but they can't be heard because of the government system. And this happens most of the time in Middle Eastern countries and Africa, because in the continent of Africa, most of the countries that are there, half of them are either self-governed or they're just dictators in a way, because their countries don't allow a government with different branches like the US do, and how there are other parties who can contribute to the decisions that the country should have. And that's because of the influence from the past. That's because we have had major two wars, World War I and World War II, that had involved the dictator Adolf Hitler, and how Germany was impacted, European countries that were impacted, Asian countries that were impacted, and even the US and Northern America and all that. So why do you think that happens? In my opinion, I think that happens because of social media. Back then, we didn't have social media to spread the awareness that there are leaders who are willing to just kill people who just say they don't like their leaders or they're going to rebel against them because of the certain consequences that the people will get. And I think that is controlling, yes, but that's also maintaining power. And that leads to like a lot of the pros of having a dictated country, because it's just not like one systematic government. It's also controlling the people while at it. Because when we see today with Donald Trump and the US, in a way it's going of a self-governed rather than people who have a thought in it. Because with Donald Trump, we see how people who are voicing their opinions and what they want, he's disregarding them because he doesn't agree with them, and he's willing to take certain precautions and measures to put an end to them, like silencing them in a way. And that's that shows dictatorship characteristics and how their personality is. And with that, the bad influence goes around the world as well, because America is a democratic slash Republican country. It's a country that's supposed to have freedom to voice your opinions, your thoughts, everything, religion, and everything. But in Middle Eastern countries, you see that most countries that are I wouldn't say self dictated, but rather like one leader who controls them is based on religion most of the time. If when you look at Iran and Saudi Arabia and all that country, they are ran by a leader who is Muslim and who will not like take upon like other ideas and modern societal ideas of like same sex marriage, LGBTQ communities, and all that into consideration, because that's morally unethical and it's not right. So why should people like have a thought into that? And so my question for my co-host will be, how have dictators changed over time and become part of modern day that the political system is corrupted? And yeah.
I think that I like where you're going with your topic, and I think that for your question, they haven't exactly changed themselves. I think the ideal is still the same, like absolute control over the people, right? But I think they've adapted to like the modern uses of technology and certain things to, like, keep that control, if you follow what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So what would start the change though? Because most of Asian countries, they are a lot of control with quote unquote dictator leaders. So yeah.
I mean, like I was saying, like they like how dictators adapted to like learning how to use modern technology to oppress and control people. I think if the people could like take back their freedom with like technology, social media, things like that, like they would be able to speak out or like start a change, you know? Because it's very easy to get influence over well online, right? And it's very easy to, well, for us, since we're American and we have enough freedom with our technology, that we could start movements and like we could speak out against like things wrong with our system. If they could like get the same freedom we have, like similar, then I think that it would help the people a lot under like dictatorships.
Well, Maurice, how do you think they would be able to get that type of help?
See, that's the part I'm not really sure about. Like, we have that freedom, like we're just given that freedom, but a lot of these people are oppressed and they don't get that. So they would have to have outside help, or like people who are really willing to like face back like backlash if it fails to like get these people that type of freedom, you know?
Mhm. And Mahzabin, earlier you mentioned like what countries did you mention? Iran and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Like
I
the
like
Middle Eastern countries.
yeah, Middle Eastern countries. Do you think they're more of a dictatorship, as you said, a quote unquote, like you said, because they follow a more theocratic society involving more of religion into their policies and stuff, or is it more because of their authoritarian rule they have?
Yeah.
Well, isn't there like some form of theocracy in fascism? Because there are certain rules or like points that make a leader or a country fascist. Like for example, demonizing a certain culture, race, religion. That's what Hitler did for the Jews. He demonized them and blamed them for all the problems. He also added religion in the mix so he could claim it as a to morally justify the genocide and hate that he has against those Jews.
I mean, I can see like what you're saying, right? Like obviously, like a theocracy is following like a set of rules that were set not now, right? They were set in a time that was much different than we live in now, um, which makes it less like redeeming and more just like it does seem like a fascist rule. But when you like in especially Middle Eastern countries, it's like a little different, right? They're not really. I'm pretty sure like the difference between like a fascist is like a militaristic kind of intent, and I guess to me that's just what I think of when I think of dictator. I think of like militarism. I think of Hitler. I think of Stalin. I think of people like that who their goal is to strengthen their military and then take over as much as they possibly can. I feel like that's more like what a dictator is, less than a theocracy, though. A theocracy stands in like its own separate camp. I feel.
Yeah, because so there's 5 kinds of dictatorship. There's hybrid dictatorship, military monarchies, personalist, and single party dictatorship. And so those like the European countries that you named and like Russia included, right? They are military based dictatorship because of how most of the controlling that happened was through military and war and all that. But then there's also monarchies that's happening right now, like in modern society. Like many countries are based on kings and queens. So that kind of goes with like why is there like a king and queens to the modern society still, or like a single party dictatorship, you know?
So like I assume you obviously mean like Britain and how they have a queen and king, kind of. Um, like so a monarchy is when there's a ruler and they rule within the family. That's like the only difference between like a dictatorship. Some of the time in a dictatorship, there's not like that connection between the families. It's just like whoever would be the second most powerful when the current dictator dies would then take over. Be like a general or something. In the case of, let's say, if Hitler died, it would have been. I mean, during the war, a general would have taken over as the dictator or the second in command or whatever, not his child, I think. Um, but then when you're talking about like um, how like there's like I mean they're still dictators, right? Like Kim Jong Un is a dictator. Even if you don't want to say it, like Putin is still a dictator. I mean, they do have quote unquote democratical, they're democratic elections, but he's won every single one. So that's not that's not a democracy. That's still a dictatorship. Just posed as a democracy.
Democracy, yeah,
Yeah.
like the same way as like in North Korea they call it the full name is the Democratic Republic of Korea of North Korea. I think that's the full name. It's just like the title themselves that they're given rather than the actual actions
Yeah.
that take place in the government.
Yeah, like China is also in a way people do talk about that China is a dictator country because there are certain rules and regulations they have to follow. They have like the Chinese party and the representation that they have is solely based on the force that the leader has, like their president, I believe, their president, yeah, presidential way of controlling. And there are other Middle Eastern countries like Turkey, and then United Arab Emirates. All of that, they're not bad dictatorship in a way, but they do have the controlling system through like religion and how you should be, how you should take care of itself, morals, and all that.
Well, do you think every single dictatorship could be bad or is gonna be bad? Or do you think that some dictatorships could possibly prosper?
No, I think that I don't think that all dictatorships are bad, because a lot of the times the people like their leaders, you know. Certain countries like Saudi Arabia, they like their leaders, you know. They have no problem with having a king, quote unquote king, because his title is king, as their leader, because their societal way is very stable. You know, there aren't any like, I don't like this because of how the government system is treating these people differently, you know, because most of it is, they are Muslim, so they have no problem with it because everyone follows the same ethnics, rules, morals, and all whatnot. But then we have Thailand. It is a dictator country with their prime minister, but they have different types of morals. Like in Thailand, they're very open about sexuality and all that, compared to how some people in Saudi Arabia, they would not like that at all, because that's, from their religion aspect, it's wrong, you know, it's a sin. But in Thailand, it's completely different. They're very open about gay people, transgender people, you know, LGBTQ and all that. So it depends on what, I wouldn't say what country, but what kind of leader they have, because in the end, there are so many countries who are just, who are people who are dying from wars that are still going on, you know. And yeah.
I kind of
I
oh, yeah, you can go.
Oh, okay. I definitely agree with what you said, that it really depends on the type of person who is in control, because certain people who, well, let's say you pick a leader you like, right? Somebody you like, right? And they have a good sense of like what I have to protect, which will be my people, right? And then what I have to defend my people against, right? And then there are people who are like more self-centered and are just about like, I want something this way and I don't want anyone to go against me, right? But I think that's all dictatorships. Like they all want like control, like absolute control, and that is what it is. But there's a certain way of making a dictatorship like a brutal dictatorship, and a very like not a good dictatorship, but like a dictatorship that the people accept are okay with, you know?
Yeah, because, so I have a list here, right?
Oh,
And it's a list of all like Middle Eastern
I was gonna
countries
say,
that
but what do
have,
you think would be needed to have a dictatorship like that?
I mean, so yeah, so I'm gonna put it together. So in Afghanistan, they're the highest population that have a dictator, right? And so we don't talk about, in like modern world, we don't talk about who is running the country. We talk about what is going on in the country, and that's because of their leader. People like, they're like, there's conflict that's going on with the US, right? Because we talk about Afghanistan and war and all that. That's because, why did that happen, right? Why is there a leader who is sacrificing so many people's lives, who were like little kids, babies, who are dying every single day because of the conflict with the US? Like, what could have happened? What could have triggered it, right? And that goes with the bad leader, you know? You shouldn't have a leader who's gonna put the country in war like throughout years with nonstop violence.
I want to change the topic. I want to go back to like where you're talking about the controlling aspect of dictatorship, where like in China, right? They have their internet controlled, where like some people have to actually use VPNs to go like access different parts of the internet that China has restricted from them, or like they can't even. I think they can't talk in certain ways, or like have or talk against their government. I'm not really sure
Yeah,
about
yeah,
governments
that is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they monitor the
Yeah,
conversation,
like
so
But, like
there are
they
so many
And that's
apps you can't use, like it's not even
there's
allowed.
certain values
Then
you can't have.
in China, you can't have more than two kids, like two babies.
No, I
That's
think
why,
that
like,
rule was abolished though.
Yeah, something like that. I remember hearing that as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
but like that's why there's so many like kids in the Chinese adoption system that people adopt in the US because like even though it's not there now, before it was like you can't have it. You have to hide your second child or you just have to like give it up for adoption. And it's like why should that be in a government system?
Well, I feel like that was more so just to maintain stability in like the economy and the
Yeah.
food production, because like China has like one of the largest population, like largest country populations in the world. Like it's a couple billion, I think, like 2 billion, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so like having that big of a population, there's gonna be so much instability if you keep on just having like multiple kids. And it's also messed up what they do. Like originally during that, when they had that idea in place, if you didn't have a son on your first try, and it was a daughter, they would allow you to kill it basically because, or give it up because you would want your family name to be carried on. If you only had the one kid, the one try, you would most likely want it to be a boy.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
So like okay, when you do you think that like the dictatorships that are that we have now like share any semblance with the dictatorships of World War II or prior?
I in a way, yes, because the countries that are like it goes back to like Middle Eastern most of the time, like in Asia, because like during the World War I, World War II, and the influence from Hitler and the previous dictators, right? Many still have that type of mentality that I'm the sole power in this country. You listen to what I do, or else there are consequences. Just like Kim Jong Un with North Korea, he's very strict into how people should be, how people should dress, how people have a specific haircut and all that. That goes with how maybe not how Hitler was, but it's the influence of how Hitler was. It's the generation that passed down to Kim Jong Un, his father, his grandfather. All of them were dictators who controlled the country with such specific rules and regulations. So I think like it's a bad example of how the world is right now.
Yeah.
I
Um,
agree.
I had a question, another question. Like so, earlier you had said that some of the people that are being like I guess ruled by dictators, they like their dictators. Do you think that's more of a reason, like less that they agree with them and whatever, and more is that a fear thing that they fear them, or is it a case of Stockholm syndrome, where you learn to love your captor?
I think it's kind of both. Like let's say, so in Saudi Arabia, right? You're not if you're a foreigner who's not Muslim, or yeah, like if you're not Muslim, then you have to, if you're trying to visit the country or whatever, you have to wear certain clothes in public, right? So that kind of goes with it that people have no problem. Like, of course, there's like a lot of people within who would be like, I don't like how it is, how the system is, and how what I should wear or not. But people who are just used to it, they're fine with it. They're fine with the way what they wear, what men wear, how women wear, how how their lives are and everything. Because there isn't specific rules to be like, you can't do these stuff. They're like ethical rules that everyone follows, placed like in everybody, right? Because they're all Muslim, because it's a Muslim country. So when they're like foreigners who go into it, they would have a lot of problem with it, because let's say they are a gay couple, right? They would definitely not be welcomed because they're gay. That's against their ethical and moral um lifestyle, because people see that as a sin. However, they won't be kicked out they will not be like I wouldn't say discriminated because everyone is discriminated. So yeah, like it depends on how people perceive the country as. Like if it's a good country that have like good stability and balance, people aren't rebelling against it. People, you don't see people talking and fighting and rioting and protesting every day about those countries and how they are being controlled and whatnot.
I agree. If you but like an example that I really like about dictators is the example of Cuba and Fidel Castro. To like in and I feel like in a way that's kind of also a mix between like less of like the fear kind of thing because at one point somebody just led for so long that like the fear of them ruling kind of just like dissipates. I feel more like in that situation, the people loved him. They idolized him because even though he was like a pretty bad guy, like they were the best they ever had. Right? He was the best they ever had. Right? Who would they have before? They had horrible dictators put in place by the United States. They were constantly ruled by people who didn't know their struggles, but then Fidel Castro comes along and he knows exactly what they want. He tries to help them the best that they can. But the appearance is like in Western culture in the United States specifically, the appearance of a country being led by a dictator is one that will not work and is only running because of the fear that people are feeling for their government. But in the case of the Cubans, they liked him. They didn't want him to die, right? They didn't want him to be assassinated. They didn't want anything like that. They didn't rebel against him. And I feel like that's an interesting situation to where it's a mix of the Stockholm syndrome kind of aspect, but also like caring for the dictator less than I feel like is prevalent now. Like in North Korea, they kind of hate him, right? They realize that he's been lying to them for like centuries. Like his family has been lying to him for centuries because they thought that he was like a god basically, and they I guess found out that he wasn't, through various means. And then I even feel like the idea with Putin. Putin is definitely a dictator, but he's like posing to the people that he's not, and I feel like that breeds a lot of hatred. But I also feel like in that case it's different because there's a lot of people, and they just like they've only known that forever, basically communism and dictatorship forever. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that because if the dictator is making the country better and having control with how people like it, there's no problem with it. Like, why should anyone go against that leader? Because he or she is doing a good job in it. But if, like, example, Kim Jong Un again, if he is controlling people's lives individually and punishing people, like, people can't even go out of the country. If they're caught, they get killed, or put in like prisons or whatnot, right? So that's the bad side of it. And if no one else has anything to say, does anyone else have anything to say? I'll tell you that
No,
as
I
a
think
no.
you covered everything I wanted to
I
say
have to
about
say.
this topic.
Yeah. But there are bad and goods in all of them. The government system is very corrupted, regardless of what country it is. So it's a very complicated topic to talk about. But thank you for everyone who talked today, and that will be it for our podcast, Quarantine Room. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for joining us.
Thank you too.